Hey, my friends. So I am lucky enough to be here making a video about Benebell Wen's beautiful new Spirit Keepers Tarot. I was offered the opportunity to buy an early copy of the deck so that, in essence, we could help get the word out. But the deck sold out in about 7 days, I think. So bravo there. So then I went back and forth on whether or not to do a video including this deck, because I knew there were going to be several walkthroughs of it, and because I knew that it wasn't gettable anymore. But ultimately I decided I would do it, because I felt like that was really the main reason I gave in and got it. And the other thing is, obviously Benebell Wen has said she's not really thinking about a second print run right now. Creators, anyone who creates anything wants their stuff to be wanted and wants it to be out in the world. So I imagine with time, it's possible she could be gently encouraged by devoted fans. I will say, the way to go about that is not to bully people. So if you did miss out, you can actually download the keys or the trumps, the majors, from her website, and so you have access to those. And I imagine, with some time, you have to think about the fact that there was the initial sort of offer to some folks who, like me, are enablers, and those had to get sent out, and then the pre-orders and then the orders. So it's going to be a while, I think, probably into next year before I would imagine like all the final copies are sent out to the world, is my guess. So I probably wouldn't start bugging her if I were you until the new year. And I would say again, if you are going to encourage anyone to do a reprint or to address a question you have, is to be thoughtful about it. I have seen at least one post from Benebell about someone who really approached with a really entitled sort of horrible way, and that's a great way to get someone to not want to help you. It's a really great way to get someone to say, I'm not doing a reprint of this, because it's a lot of fucking work. These are projects of passion, whether it's a book or a deck and a book, whatever it is, and it's expensive because it's not just the writing and the painting and the drawing. It's the test copies, it's in many cases getting an editor or a graphic designer, all of the iterations of supplies. It's costly, and in this case Benebell didn't do a Kickstarter, so she funded everything up front. So that's money. And so I guess I'm beginning this video, which I wasn't expecting to do, with just a list of reasons why you shouldn't be a dick nozzle to deck creators when you want something from them. So I would encourage people to be encouraging and thoughtful, to be tolerant of the fact that this takes a lot of work and that the process of sending these out into the world has only just begun. And so if you did miss out and you want to be encouraging, be thoughtful and kind and generous, because that's what this community does best. So that's what I would say about that. And that goes for any creator. I have seen countless deck creators, and sometimes deck creators or book writers or whatever do things that warrant being addressed. We all know examples of that, but that's very few and far between. So anyway, be nice to Benebell and all deck creators whose work you want but can't get your hands on. So, with that being said, let's talk about this particular deck. So, in a weird way, I'm kind of an ideal person to talk about this deck, because it is a reflection of exactly the opposite of how I read, which is fun for me to explore. As you've watched my channel over the years, if you have, you know that I've really gone from the Waite-Smith system to something much more mundane and what I call earthy, more banal, even more practical, and that was what my book was really about, was sort of bringing tarot down to earth. This is the opposite of that. This is really about spirit. This is an occult deck, and it's filled with Benebell's lifetime worth of knowledge of esoteric art and practices and the Golden Dawn and Zoroastrianism and Theosophy. And that's one reason why I waited to make this video until I had the physical copy of the book in my hands. So I have been reading the book. I read the book through the e-version that came with the package of the deck that I bought. You have to buy the premium package, I think, to get the book. So I've been reading it, and it just came earlier, and I wanted to just sort of transpose all my... I put these little tabs in here to just remind myself the things I wanted to talk about and the things I wanted to go back later and highlight. I think you need the book. I think, Benebell has said you can use the deck. She designed it to be accessible and available to people who have any familiarity with Waite-Smith or with the Crowley decks. But I think that what she's made, my phone. I think that what she's made is really a new system. And while you can use it, like the other systems, I think you'd be denying yourself an opportunity to work with what she's made. And it really is very particular and very specific to her cosmology and the immense amount of research she's done over her spiritual life, really. And I think to not engage the book you'd just be missing out. You don't need to print it. I have to say I would recommend print. Now, I ordered a printed copy from Lulu, and actually it looks pretty good in the video. There are a couple printing issues which are unfortunate. Those are Lulu issues, not book issues, so I'll address my concerns with Lulu. But you can get this printed anywhere. You can get print on demand services. You can also just print it from your home printer, and whatever way you do it, and in fact I can see it being really valuable to just print it on your home printer and 3-hole punch it and throw it in a binder, because I think this is a book you're going to want to get your hands on. And one of the things that's encouraged, of course, one of the things she encourages in this deck and in this book is to color, do some ritual coloring of the card images in the book. I imagine coloring it in the actual deck would be difficult because of the cardstock, which is beautiful, by the way. So let's just start with like the physicality. So when you get when you ordered it, it came with 4 stickers and this lovely sort of prayer card, and also a magnet, which I have since put up somewhere. The deck itself is really beautiful. The amount of like brilliance she's managed to devote to the printing of this deck in such a quick amount of time is kind of mind-blowing. So it comes in this great, beautiful box. In the book, she describes the design of the box, why things are where they are, etc. So you can actually go into the back of the book, and she describes the card back designs and why they are that way in the card box. I mean, Benebell is kind of a genius. I think it goes without saying. And the thoroughness of what she's made here that's why the book is so important, I think, because it's not just a tarot deck. It is a system for accessing your spirituality. And that's why it's really interesting to me. So I don't know if this is a thing she's doing for everybody or just for those initial pre-orders, but it came with a little stone, which I plan on keeping in the box. And actually, it closes just fine with the little white book and the stone in there. But to close it all the way, I'll probably take the little white book out. And then there's the certificate of authenticity with this beautiful design on it. And then the little white book, which she has said publicly she wrote only because people told her she had to. There are a couple things in here that she references in the book as like a resource, but she's sort of said, this is what you need. All right, and then you have the beautiful cards. The cardstock is really delicious. I mean, I was talking in another video about sexy cardstock. This is really sexy cardstock. It's gilded, and the choice, there's nothing in any of this that wasn't a deliberate, specific, thought-out choice, which again I think just speaks to her meticulousness and her brilliance as a tarotist, as a creator, as a writer, and as a thinker. So beautiful cardstock, beautiful box. So I haven't really worked with this deck. I think what I've been doing is exploring the system. And so I can't speak to the specifics of like working with it yet. And I may come back, you know, as many of you know, I've just been in a really like low space lately. And so I haven't, maybe it's a good time for me to explore these things, but I have not yet done that. So what I want to just do is share with you the system so that you know what you're engaging with. And because I think it's pretty brilliant. There's so much to say. I want to try to keep this relatively brief so that it's interesting, although I'm 10 minutes in and I've only just opened up the deck, right? So we'll come back to the cards in a moment, and I'm not going to do a walkthrough. What I want to do is just talk about the structure of the system. Now, in the book, no matter what format you read it in, there's a lot. And I've said this in my own book, I'm a frequent skipper of introductions. I really do recommend reading her introduction, but even more than that, you're going to find a design statement which explores the creation and what her attempts were. And I would really recommend doing that. But if you skip it, then on page 24, I think what you need to do is you need to see this part here, because where she's going is she's explaining, in essence, the structure of the deck. So you have your traditional 78 cards. Actually, there's 2 extra. But the way she structures the deck is different than what you get when you normally get a deck of tarot cards. And you're going to see it when you open it up and start flipping through. And so the things that are important to note are, first of all, that there are, I'll get to this in a second, but there are 3 key zeros or trump zeros, the major arcana card, the Fool. And this is the Fool is a very different card in this deck. So there are 3 of those, but then the major arcana are divided into 3 sets of 7. So the first 7 cards explore what she calls the first septenary, which is integration of the self. And then the next 7, which would be 8 through 14, are the second septenary, which is the integration of the cosmos. And then the third septenary is the integration of the divine. So that would be 15 through 21. So that's how the major arcana is built. And I don't think I bookmarked it necessarily. I probably didn't in this shot. There are so many things. When I was going through and bookmarking this, there were like so many things I was sticking notes on, and I said, I can't talk about all of this in the video. People are just going to have to read the book. But I'll try to do this when I look at the cards. But there are links between the first card in each set of 7, the second card in each set of 7, etc. So she's been very intentional. And her intentionality permeates this deck. It permeates the book. I mean, her wisdom and her thoughtfulness. I don't think I've encountered a deck creator who's been so sort of openly intentional about every choice. And I think you could say without question that everything here is here for a reason. So we have 3 Fool cards I'll talk about in a second. And then the structure of the minor arcana is the same, the pips. You have 1 through 10 and then 4 courts. But the way they're laid out when you open the deck is specific to the way she's viewing them. And so you start, I think you start with, I may have put the deck back in a different order when I shuffled it, but you start with what she calls the 7 lower realms, which is cards, pip cards 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And she goes on, she explains what the realms are. She says the lower realm is the world as it has been formed. And so here's where we get into the real spiritual cosmology of the deck and the structure of it. And then the upper realms are the aces, 2s, 3s, and the court cards. And so the upper realm, she says, is the touch point, is the touchdown point from the primordial form of the formless. The upper realm designs the spiritual and metaphysical architecture that the lower realm is based on. And she goes into all of this. She talks about the art style, but it's important to know the structure that you're working with when you open the deck for the first time, because the structure of the deck is like any tarot deck, and you can use it in that way. But the way she's approaching it and the way she'll actually approach the whole deck throughout the book is in these chunks: the first septenary, the second septenary, the third septenary, the lower realms, and the upper realms. Oh, I think it's right here. The way she, yes. So this is so interesting. Let me see if I can zoom in just a touch so you can see sort of what I'm talking about. I don't know if this will be super clear for you, but we'll try. So what she's done is she's laid out the majors here in the sets of 7. And this is something you really should explore anyway. But as you look through each set, you know, here we have the Magus, the Force, and the Demon, which would be the Magician, Strength, and the Devil. And there's an evolution, for example, of this serpent-like figure. Same thing for the, what's the high priestess called? The priestess. Oh god, card 9 would be the erudite, I think, and then the tower. So there's a linkage, you can see. So she's, I mean, the intentionality is really incredible. All right, so I really recommend reading the design statement. It's kind of the sort of thing that you want to skip, you know, because you want to get right to the meat and the juice and the guts of the thing. But actually, the intentionality and the design work is part of the meat. You know what I mean? You need that. You need that to be part of it. She talks more specifically about the ordering of the deck. Then she gets into the sort of cosmology. She talks about beneficent spirits. And again, I would read everything. The first, so let me say this, like, she goes into the cards one by one. Like, this part, to me, it's interesting, but what I would do is really focus on the beginning of the book, and then as you start to work with each individual card, I would come to this part and reference it, because here she explains why everything's in each card, what the influences and meanings are, but you know, you're just never going to remember all of that. So I think you can read it all the way through. I, to be honest, really like skimmed the card descriptions to see where she was coming from and to see what her meanings were. But actually, the first part of the book, before she gets into the card meanings, is really the part that teaches you how this system is different. Working with the individual cards. Each individual card is to her thinking, an individual spirit. And I think as you encounter each, it's a really good thing to come and then like go to the book of maps, to come to your map and your GPS and say, how do I find my way through this card? There's a whole process in the beginning about initiation, and sort of being an initiate. She has a checklist for activating yourself and activating yourself in the context of this deck. She talks about working with your holy guardian angel. She talks about ritual coloring, which, as I mentioned, is important to it. And then she talks about anointing yourself. And that's another thing I neglected to mention, was that she anointed each of these decks. And so she gives you a recipe for an anointing oil that you can use on yourself, talking about protecting yourself, how she built protection into the deck for you. And then she sort of goes into an initiation process of learning the deck and learning about yourself in the use of it. And there's so much here, like I really can't talk about everything, and I would ruin it if I did. One of the things that she does, though, and she started talking about some similar things when she was at the Reader Studio, is the ability to use cards as a way to dialogue with spirits, with ancestors, with yourself, with your DNA. And in this book, she uses it as a tool for dialoguing with your inner guardian angel, your higher self. She talks about doing Akashic records readings and how to do them thoughtfully and intentionally, and to engage in a dialogue with the record keepers. Brilliant stuff. I mean, a lot of it is, I'm just gonna be fully, because I am such a banal reader, and I don't mean that in a negative way, it's just my thing. This is something else. And a lot of it is, I read this book sort of with the intention of understanding the system so that I could make a video. What I now need to do is go back and internalize a lot of the stuff that's somewhat over my head. But she'll talk about conversing with a spirit, and using the deck in an active way as a dialogue tool, which to me is really kind of brilliant. Not kind of brilliant, but brilliant. And then she'll give you some more everyday things. So she's got a daily reading spread. Her spreads are so clever. I think she's one of the most creative developer of spreads. I use one of her spreads in my shop, actually, which I give her credit for. Seeing the unseen, petitioning for keys, revealing a spirit presence. Like, she's got a lot in here. And then you get into healing yourself after readings. The large chunk of the book is a description of the cards, which again is to be used for ritual coloring the pictures. The court cards are very different in this deck, and it's worth understanding them. So, because you'll see that when you get in. And again, she says you can use them the way you used any court card. But of course, she designed a system, and they're based on a system of angelology. And so the kings are archangels. And I won't get into the specifics again. She gives it all to you here. The queens are shields. The knights are shinings. And she talks about what that means and why. And then the pages are strongholds, and they each represent their element. And the pages are interesting too. If you notice, I'll hold up the book rather than zooming in. There's a little envelope in the corner of each card. And so when a page shows up in a reading, she actually suggests that the page, because pages are messengers, they have a message for you. So you draw another card to find out what the message is, which I think is just a brilliant touch. But so smart. And then so she goes through each of the cards in the court, what they mean and where they came from, why she chose what she chose. And then I mentioned already, she talks about her creation of the card packaging and box. She talks about a whole lot of stuff about working with the deck for invocation and evocation of spirits, engaging with higher beings. And then she gets into a great just sort of essay about her experience of working with Crowley and Waite. And I won't get into that. It's really worth reading. Everything in here is worth reading. And she talks about more of her cosmology in the back, the cultural integration. And then, again, the card design back. And then in the back, there's a table of correspondences. So that's the book. The book is, to me, as important as the deck. They work hand in hand. I think if you really want to get the most out of what she's made, you need the book. So the book is good, and it's definitely important. You don't need to print it in this, formal way. I wanted it in part just because I'm a book nerd, and in part just I wanted to show you what this could look like in its best self, and its best iteration, which I think is really, really cool. It looks really nice, despite a couple printing issues. Lulu, I'm looking at you, but we will deal with it. So it looks really good. So I use Lulu. You don't have to use Lulu. When you buy the premium package, I think most people who have gotten it have gotten the book as an ebook. You can print it at Staples, and that even better than a binder might even be getting it spiral bound at Staples. All right, so let's look at the cards a little bit. I'm not going to do like a totally complete walkthrough because they're out there already, because this deck has kind of exploded in a way it deserves to. So as I mentioned, there are 3 Fool cards. And really, Fool is a misnomer in this deck. There are 3 key zeros. And I will zoom in for this a little bit. Plurk. Let's slide this over. And the 3 cards were designed with intentionality. And they each have a different purpose. And the Fool card in this deck, well, I'll just call it the Fool, but obviously they have different titles, serves a purpose. It's always your significator, and you choose the significator based on what you're doing. So each version of this card represents a different phase of your process with the deck. So the Initiate is really, she says, the card that you use when you're going through all of the initiation stuff in the book. And really after that point, you can sort of retire the card. The Seeker you would use when you're acting as a querent or a reader, you want answers. And then the Keeper when you're acting as the Spirit Keeper. And she based this keeper card on a wedding picture of her mother, which is really beautiful. So each of the cards has a different purpose. You don't necessarily keep them all in the deck all the time. It depends on, what your intention is as you approach the deck. And I think it's right on, right? Because she's so intentional about all of this that, of course, she would be really intentional about having a significator in the deck that represents not just you, but what you're doing, what you're aiming for as you go through the reading, or as you go through, you call it a reading. I guess it is all that dialoguing, all the connections, all the various things. All right, so that's what you have as the Fool is really a trio of 3 that you choose from depending on what you're doing. And there's a lot of times where you'll take the Seeker and you'll shuffle it into the deck, and you'll look for the card that is in front of it as your answer. So it's not unlike using the significators in like a Lenormand reading in that regard. So what I thought I would do, rather than doing a complete walkthrough of the deck, is just sort of give you some examples of like some coolness and what to expect, if you haven't yet seen it. So the art is so in depth, and in the book she calls it busy, but it is sort of a hypnotic thing. And I think what it does is it is in a way to me like a magic art poster, and you can sink into the images and figure out and find things that are particularly interesting to you. The trumps are fairly universally renamed, although they're recognizably so. Some of them are like the priestess and the empress are similar. The emperor is similar. The pope is the Holy See. Sorry, I'm just sort of gathering my thoughts. There's so much to say about this deck that I'm even more sputtery and stuttery than usual. Each also has its title and then its spirit. So, for example, the Lovers is Mystery of the Covenant, and she talks about each of these in the book, so you don't have to guess. Is there anything... I think I really kind of talked about the interesting things in her design. I like that the Hanged Man is called the Outlaw. Just as a purely practical reader, I frequently view that card as having to do with consequences. So, Death is the Reaper. The Tower. The Necromancer is the Moon. The Warrior is the Sun. The Apocalypse is the Last Judgment, and New World Order is the World. If I can't remember if I put this back together right. I think this is, but what you'll notice when you open the deck for the first time is it's arranged by number. So you're going to start with the 4 aces, I believe. It might actually start with the 4s in the lower realm. I can't remember. I was desperate to shuffle it. So you get the 4 aces, and then you go into the 2s, the 3s, etc. When you get to 4, at least in the way I ordered it, there'll be a break. So once you get past the 3s, I'm pretty sure this is how this got broken up. You then get into the courts because they're part of the upper realm. And they, again, are arranged as such by Archangel and then Shield. It was Archangel, Shield, Shining, and Stronghold. And then you get into the rest of the minors. Yeah, here they are. So then you get... I don't even know if I should really do a walkthrough. Then you get the rest of the minors. So the setup is very different as when you're opening the deck. But of course, all of that is very intentional. And then, of course, you shuffle. So I could do a walkthrough if you wanted me to, but they're out there. I just really wanted to talk about the system and just share what I think of like the thing as a whole, rather than just looking at the individual art. Like the art is beautiful. It's really, it's, you know, she sort of it was inspired in part by woodblock prints. I mean, I'm kind of in awe. You know, she's a writer, she's a tarot reader, she's an artist, she's a lawyer, she's all of these things. I mean, I was, it's funny, when I was at the Reader Studio, she did the brilliant presentation. And I was super intimidated, and I know people always say, like, I'm just me, why be intimidated? But, like, just people's brains are so incredible, and you're like, oh my God. So I never really got to meet her, and then after, I think we exchanged a message, and I was like, oh, I was just too shy. But I mean, like, how could you not be intimidated? Because you're dealing with, like, a legitimate genius. There is so much here. And the other thing that I love about what she's done, aside from the intentionality, aside from the specificity and the meticulousness, is also that she's bringing together a cosmology that comes from the Golden Dawn and Theosophy and Zoroastrianism and Buddhism and Eastern, I hate that word, but Eastern religions, and her whole life experience. And I think, my cosmology is a salad too. So I resonate with that. I am not, I am not, as a reader, I'm not a spiritual, I don't have a spiritual bent. In fact, I've worked very actively in the opposite direction in years. And I will likely remain that way when reading for others, but I can definitely see working with this as a tool to explore some absences that I've felt, in my own cosmology. And so maybe one of the reasons why this arrived as it did, because I really honestly was like, oh my God, this looks so cool. That's not how I read cards. I probably won't buy it. And then I did, it was really just sort of like, what the hell? You know what I mean? If nothing else, I can share with the couple thousand folks who subscribe to me, like, get this deck out into the world, which turned out not to be necessary, but maybe, there was an underlying thing happening, and there's a reason why these are sitting in front of me. It is intimidating, I'll say. It makes me a little bit nervous to go down that path, because you never know what you're going to find at the other end. But despite that nervousness, she's been very, again, intentional and thoughtful in the book to say, look, I've built in all these things to protect you from anything bad. This is really about accessing a positive spirituality. So again, her intentionality and thoughtfulness is really clear in even her wanting to make this a safe tool for folks to use. And I think, that layer and that level of generosity comes through. I think, I've said this about Yoav Bendov's deck. Even in this mass-produced edition, you can sort of feel his generosity of spirit in it. And I think in here, you feel Benebell's generosity of spirit and her thoughtfulness, and I keep using this, but her intentionality and all of that. So this is kind of a deep dive look at the Book of Maps and the Spirit Keeper's Tarot and the brilliance involved within it. And again, just to reiterate, it's sold out, its initial print run. There is, at the moment, no intention of doing another print run. I would guess, with the amount of work that went into this, at some point, my guess is that she'll probably be talked into doing it. And you may well be able to contribute to that if you do so with kindness and thoughtfulness, and you recognize that between now and December, she has to mail out 1,000 decks. So I wouldn't push my luck and act like an entitled dick nozzle. Not that anyone watching this would, right? Like, nobody would be that way. But we know that there are people out there like that, so... Yeah, so here's sort of an unusual video for me, this sort of unusual look at an unusual deck. There's nothing else like this in the world. Again, if you missed out, you can get the trumps, the keys, on her website, and you can print them yourself, and so at least you have that. I don't know. I should have looked. I don't know if she's selling the Book of Maps just as an ebook without the deck. You'll have to check out her website for that. But if you if you did get this set and you have the book, I really would recommend printing the book in some way and really engaging with the book. I think about when I'm looking at this, I only have one other deck that I would work with in a similar way, which is just personally, it's the Wildwood. The Wildwood I tend to use with the book, and I only use it for me, and I can see that being the case with this. Because again, I think this is more than a tarot deck. I think in the book, she's like, you can use it as a tarot deck, you can ignore everything I say and use it and be great with it. But to me, this is more than just a deck for readings. It's a tool for spiritual development in a kind of adapting cosmology and an evolving cosmology. So that's that. So that's a lot. Hopefully this was interesting. Thank you to Benebell for making this available to folks and for putting so much effort and labor into this really amazing work of art. And yeah, that's that. So be good, and we'll talk soon.